person nervous? Let's start with a little story about this guy named Dixon. He noticed that he has some intermittent numbness in his hands after working on his laptop for several hours straight. And now the problem is getting worse. He was unable to hold his pen, and starting his car was painful. He wondered if the problem was with his muscles or his nerves. He's not sure. So what we want to look at in this lesson is how it is that the structure of a nerve cell relates to sending a nerve impulse, the signal that the nervous system uses to transmit information. Let's first take a look at the job of the nervous system. What's its job? Well, if you could put it into two main groups, it would be to integrate and to coordinate. Now, integrate is this idea of bringing things together. Coordinate is making all those things, once they're brought together, work well. So let's see what we're talking about, integrate compared to coordinate. So if you were thinking, or if you were just thinking about something, that would be integrating information. You're processing it. You're trying to make sense of it. If you are moving your hand, moving your head, that's going to be more coordination. And you probably know some people who are very coordinated in their movements. Because now we're combining nerves and muscles together in a coordinated way. What if you want to know just how much something water there is in that container? You're estimating. So here, you're bringing pieces of information together to integrate it, which is part of what your nervous system does. How about the timing of events? So you're trying to time it so that you can merge into traffic as you're getting on the on-ramp. All right, that's coordination. Your nervous system coordinating those things to be able to get into traffic. How about just sensing something? You smell it. You touch it. All right, that's going to be integrating that information. All that information is coming into your mind through your five senses, and you process it. How about releasing hormones? Well, again, that has to do more with coordinating. The nervous system is coordinating with the endocrine system to get your body to release the hormones that it needs at the time that it needs them, so that you can do whatever it is that your body is trying to do. So the nervous system, integrate, coordinate. That's its main jobs. Integrate, coordinate. Now I can take the whole nervous system and I can divide it into two categories. One category we're going to call the central nervous system, and that's your brain and spinal cord. So your brain, spinal cord, central nervous system. The other we're going to call the peripheral nervous system. That's all the other nerves all around your body. So branching out of the spine, going out to your fingertips, at the base of your brain, branching out the base of your brain, going to your face, all over your body. Those are peripheral nerves, the peripheral. Now we can take the nervous system and divide it in a different way. This is more of a cellular kind of division. We're going to divide the nervous system cells into two main categories. One category is called neuroglial cells. The other category is called neurons. So what are the two cells of the nervous system? Well, there's neuroglial cells and there's neurons. Now that raises a question. What's the job of these cells? What do these cells do? How would I describe their job? Well, the neurons are going to be transmitting impulses. The neurons, they're going to be conducting electrical charges, transmitting those impulses. Neuroglial cells are more supportive cells. So they're going to be protecting, supporting, nourishing, helping neurons to do their functions. So these are more supportive cells. Now neurons, we pretty much have all the neurons we're going to have. They don't replicate and divide very easily. Neuroglial cells can regenerate a little easier. So if you have an injury to a neuron, you might be stuck with that injury for a long time. You might never heal. Neuroglial cell injuries, there's a potential for healing because those cells can divide. And we can make another division of these cells in the nervous system. When we're looking at neurons, are they sending the impulse away from the brain and spinal cord? Are they bringing it toward the brain and spinal cord? Or are they integrating the information within the brain and spinal cord? So if they're sending the information toward, we call that sensory neurons. They're sensory. They're bringing the information toward the central nervous system. So that's your see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Motor neurons are taking the information away from the central nervous system. So here they're going to be stimulating a muscle, or they're going to stimulate a gland to do something. The muscle to contract, the gland to secrete some sort of hormone, or other things. 99% of your neurons are here, brain and spinal cord. The vast majority of your neurons are association. There's not a whole lot of neurons that are scattered throughout your body as motor and sensory nerves. So here we have the sensing. So you put your hand on a flame. Ow! That was hot. The sense takes that signal, that nerve impulse, to an interneuron. It's going to figure out what to do with it. In this case, a reflex where that's, ooh, that's bad, we need to move it. The impulse comes back to the muscle, causing the muscle to contract, that effector, the muscle or gland, in this case a muscle, causing our finger to move away from that flame. Now let's take a second and look at our story. So let's go back to our story. But Dixon was afraid that he might have ALS, sometimes called Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a progressive disease where only motor neurons die. How would that impact his skeletal muscles? How would the person die? Can a person with ALS still think and feel? Let's take a look at these neurons again, and let's see if we can. Let's take a look at these neurons. Let's see if we can match them up. Which one's sensory? Which one's motor? Which one is association? Let's add a little bit more to our story. Dixon describes a shooting pain in his hands to the doctor. He complains that his right hand is weak and that he drops things. What type of information do Dixon's peripheral nerves carry? Motor, sensory, or both? Here's a typical neuron, the image of a typical neuron, nerve cell. What we have over here is the cell body. So this is where all the organelles of the cell are. So you might remember back to the cell parts like the nucleus, the ribosomes, and the mitochondria. This is where most of those organelles are going to be here in the cell body. Extending from that cell body are these small projections. They're called dendrites. Dendrites are going to pick up and gather up information from around that neuron. Processed here in the cell body, those nerve impulses or that nerve signal will travel down the length of this long arm of the cell called the axon. And that's going to transmit things away from the cell. So this is where the information is being received. This part of the cell, the axon, is sending information. Axons then usually terminate at some other nerve or maybe at a muscle or maybe at a gland, like that. Just see if you can remember some parts to this nerve cell. This part here, these small projections, this main part, this long extension. When we talk about a nerve like the sciatic nerve or the facial nerve, we're talking about a lot of neurons that are running in parallel with each other, consisting of parallel axons, parallel dendrites, and usually it consists of lots and lots of nerves. So the larger the nerve, the more neurons that are involved. Smaller nerve might only have a few. Usually nerves are covered with some sort of connective tissue. And they're categorized as being sensory nerve, motor nerve, or mixed. So either they're bringing that information toward the central nervous system, they're taking that information away from the central nervous system, or they're going to be a little bit of both. They're bringing some signals and might be sending others. That covering, connective tissue covering, is referred to as myelin sheath. Now, myelin can increase the speed of a nerve impulse. Myelin is made up of Schwann cells. So these are going to be the supportive neuroglial kind of cells. These are going to be supportive neuroglial kind of cells that wrap themselves around the nerves, providing a little covering, allowing that nerve impulse to travel much faster. The spaces in between these Schwann cells are called the nodes of Ranvier. So let's take a little look at what some of those things are like. Here's our nerve cell. Dendrites, cell body, axon. But notice now that the axon is being wrapped by these other cells. So these other cells have wrapped around that axon. Those are called Schwann cells. The spaces in between these Schwann cells are called the nodes of Ranvier. Now the reason why myelination is significant is because this myelin sheath allows that nerve impulse to travel much, much faster. Normally the nerve impulse has to travel down each little part of that axon before it gets to the next nerve or muscle. With this myelination, this myelin sheath, that nerve impulse can skip from one node of Ranvier to the next. And by skipping along the length of that axon, the impulse speed goes way up. It's dramatically faster. Here's our Schwann cell. Notice how it wraps around that axon. Kind of like you would wrap layers of tape. Let's just take a look at what it would be like. Here's our typical nerve impulse. All right, so here's our nerve impulse traveling down the length of an axon. All right, so we're just moving that nerve signal, that electronic signal, down the length of the axon. The larger the diameter of the nerve, the faster the nerve impulse can travel. So larger diameter nerves travel faster. But look at a myelinated nerve. The myelin increases the diameter, but it also increases the speed because the nerve impulse can skip down the length of the axon. So which is going to be the faster nerve impulse? The myelinated one is the fastest one. So compare it to you walk into a room. Your pupils dilate to adjust to the light. That's an unmyelinated nerve, and it takes some time for your eyes to adjust. You might stand there and waiting for your eyes to adjust. Because it takes some time for your eyes to adjust. Compare that to a reflex, which is a myelinated nerve. You touch something, you move it off even before you realize that you've touched it, because it's so fast. So how would you describe a nerve that would send a really, really fast impulse? So think in terms of diameter. Think in terms of whether or not it should have of destruction of the myelin sheath, normally affecting the central nervous system, where those Schwann cells that are wrapping around that axon are turning into scars. That's where we get the word sclerosis, this idea of scarring. So now, instead of having the sheath which helps the nerve transmit the impulse, now the sheath is becoming scar tissue and it's interfering with the impulse. So what happens to the impulses? Well, they tend to get interfered with. They slow way down. Maybe they don't even get sent at all. So the symptoms would be in your central nervous system, you're not getting all the nerve signals that you should be getting. So think through what kind of symptoms would that cause. So your brain and spinal cord aren't able to send nerve impulses. Let's take a look at our story with Dixon. What might be some of those symptoms? Can Dixon's doctor eliminate multiple sclerosis as a possibility for his symptoms? Dixon's doctor reviewed his notes. I'd like to do some more tests. Perhaps your nerves are being crushed or pinched. First, I'd like to see if you have carpal tunnel syndrome. You are healthy, no family history, and have both sensory and motor symptoms in your hands. How could nerve damage explain his symptoms? So notice again, it's sensory and motor symptoms. What activities does he do that might cause it? And can Dixon's glial cells regenerate and repair themselves? So just to review, what are the two main divisions of the nervous system? We divided it, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, which is not a neuron type. So we looked at sensory neurons, motor neurons, association neurons, so support neurons don't exist. What causes multiple sclerosis? In this case, the sclerosis, scarring of the myelin. And what causes Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS? In this case, the loss of motor nerves, which is not part of a nerve cell. So we saw it has a cell body, has an axon, the long part that goes out, dendrites that are receiving information, but this is a totally different kind of cell. It's not part of a nerve cell. Good, so that's part one of a two-part lesson on nerve cells and neurons.